between Latin America, it'll be the MS-13 as well. Billions of dollars flowing into Latin America via remittances in the status quo. Their uniqueness evidence that they attempt to expend just indicates that it has decreased by 11%, but that is relative to the status quo. R1 AC evidence that indicates that that scale of remittances is hundreds of millions of dollars, particularly in the case of Latin America. Our corruption internally is unfortunately not good enough for the negative to win this debate. That our evidence indicates that some remittances cause corruption. Even if remittances are low in the status quo, those remittances still exist. They just prevent the need for reform. It doesn't make corruption worse. They have not established a linear impact, and there's certainly not a piece of evidence in this debate that does so. Some corruption, it will inevitably exist. If you vote affirmative or negative, the Twin R does not attempt to quantify that risk for you. 11% decrease is still billions, and there's, like I said, no card that establishes a linear relationship between those levels of remittances and corruption, which means that corruption is inevitable. You should err affirmative, particularly on this question of this internal link, because our evidence identifies as deforestation is something that is happening in the status quo, and the deforestation is something that is happening in the status quo and advancing at a very rapid rate, which means that an increase in remittances certainly does not prevent, would certainly not be able to stem the tide now. Also, now the impact work that the 2NR attempts to do here. Oh, okay. And fundamentally, the argument is only that corruption prevents the need for reform. That's the only link in the debate. There's no argument that remittances increase corruption, which means the only link to the Jordan economy can be linear, and links should determine uniqueness. I'm going to explain that argument on the counterpoint debate itself now. I also want to make a theoretical objection to the 2NR strategy, because they did not extend this argument in the 1AR, and we certainly didn't extend this impact argument, or sorry, rather, they didn't extend it in the block, and we certainly didn't extend that argument in the 1AR, and the idea that they could extend an argument after two speeches where it's not discussed is something that is incredibly abusive and would lead to a bad form of debate, because it would lead to a bad form of debate. And picture this, that we read a new affirmative with 12 impacts if we not talk about until the 2AR under their interpretation, which would systematically disadvantage the affirmative precisely because of situations like this, but it could replicate itself on a magnitude that is something that is worse, particularly because of the example I just gave now.
Two speeches are key. It means both sides are agreeing on something.
Yeah, and two speeches are critical because it means that both sides are agreeing on something. The MS-13 advantage, this is just silly because we conceded the link defense of the the impact defense, like there's no risk of maritime terrorism, which means that when he tries to he made the argument on the Amazon flow that it turns instability because of terrorism links between Latin America and Jordan, except we conceded their alternate causalities to terrorism, i.e. that they have no incentive to attack the things like bulk cash smuggling, and that they have that there's no symbolic effect in terms of that terrorism attack, which means
that Latin America
there's no
is going
terrorism.
to war no matter what, which means the Amazon is screwed.
Which also proves that Latin America is fucked no matter what, which means the Amazon is screwed because the effect of that war would necessarily destroy the Amazon, because it would kill vegetation there, and would just destroy the Amazon. Now, there are arguments on the MS-13 advantage about why it would check great power war does not apply in the case of failed states, which their impact evidence describes as having implications like crime and refugee flows and environmental degradation, which is another reason why we turned their impact not the other way around. And they didn't extend any argument why great power war is unlikely, and neither did we. So I have absolutely no idea where he's trying to extend this from. Their rainforest argument, I've already answered on the other flow. Now, the Jordan counterclaim, war turns the environment, which means that even if we win a small risk of a regional conflict, then that would have environmental implications, particularly because ecosystem services are something that can be accessed anywhere from the world, and they haven't really extended a reason reason why the Amazon is critical, which means that if we were to lose a keystone species, even in the Middle East, that would have global implications. Also, even if you were to lose the entirety of the even if you were to lose the entirety of the Amazon due to deforestation, that would probably be tantamount to launching one nuke, and the radiation effect of that nuclear weapon would be something that would go global and would be would destroy those ecosystem services. Now, the Jordan economy debate, remittances are critical, and the magnitude of the internal leak is why you should vote affirmative. I spent a lot of time here on the cross-ex getting him to explain precisely why remittances were something that are important. It's 23% of their GDP. It creates productive investment in the economy, and it's critical to the sustainable reform transition that Jordan is undergoing now. I do not have an answer to this argument that I'm willing to determine the direction of uniqueness. It's a really important framing argument, and it should guide your decision, especially because they do not offer another lens with which to analyze these kinds of directional uniqueness claims. The Jordan economy is particularly volatile at this juncture because they are undergoing a transition from an authoritarian structured economy to one that is democratic. The extent to which remittances make up a vital factor of their GDP means that it is undergirding this transition, and I quote the 2NC here, which is something they certainly cannot say because we did not make any arguments going the other way in terms of corruption. I also want to quote them on it turns literally everything in the debate, which is something that 2NC, it turns the economy, it turns Latin America, because it would facilitate more corruption. Also, the uniqueness, also their uniqueness, because uniqueness is inherently volatile and stable, it's just a snapshot. The direction of the link should control, particularly in the context of failed states, which is not an absolute impact. It's not like you are a good state and then you're a failed state, but rather the degree to which your state is failing determines the refugee and crime flows which spill over globally.
Explain where there might be some economic problems now because their evidence doesn't conclude it's successful. It just
those are their uniqueness arguments don't conclude reform is successful, rather than it's just happening now.